Good evening, everybody. I'm so happy to be the moderator of tonight's program because I've actually known Hiro for about 30 years, and I have great respect for him both as a person and as an authority on literature, especially Japanese poetry. And it's so interesting to me to think that he's going to be talking about haiku's expressive potential. Doesn't that sound fascinating? I can't wait to hear what he has to say. You probably know that Hiro is the author of several books about Japanese literature, and he's won several important translation prizes and done an excellent job of introducing this sector of Japanese literature to Western readers. You may not know, however, that he's also the author of a book on sex poetry. It's actually poems of his own, and the book is called That First Time, and it was published in 1988. So I just mentioned this to raise your hopes for tonight's talk even further, and also remind us all of how broadly Hiro is thinking about language and literature. So after the talk tonight, and we'll have a brief conversation, he and I, there will also be a signing of his new book, which is right here. And let me ask you to help me welcome Hiroaki Sato to the stage.
You all know about the 47 samurai. In the spring of 1701, a local daimyo wounded supervising official, and then that happened in the Edo castle. So as a result, he was condemned to seppuku that day. Now, less than 2 years later, 47 of his retainers attacked this supervising official and killed them. And then in 2 months, all of these men were condemned to death by seppuku. Now, seppuku in those days, of course, was very not like the more difficult warring age. More like a beheading, just formality. In any case, this became a very famous, provoked a lot of popular fascination. And as a result, many stories, more or less factual, and to use our president's name, favorite word, fake stories. So one of the stories goes, now after gathering for the vendetta, some of them, samurai, turned themselves into townsfolk to pretend they are not, to gather mainly information about the guy he's going to attack. They're going to attack. And one of the men who did so was Otaka Gengo. And he turned himself into a soot-sweeping bamboo vendor. Because in those days, today maybe not, but in those days it was an official event in the middle of December or 12th month to clear, to remove, like chimney They used to become dirty because they make fire inside the house. So this vendor, bamboo vendor, pretending to be the famous Heikal or Haiku Master, Kikaku, Takarai Kikaku, he ran into Otaka Gengo on a bridge, and he looked at the person and then moved. Well, he became so poor and so on. So would you turn the next one? Do you see it? So the first one is 年の親、水の流れも人の身も. That's 575. And then my miserable and worthless translation at ears, tail. Now tail, that may sound funny, so you can change it to ear's end. Both waters flow and man's fate. That's 575. And then Gengo, this pretending to be a vendor of bamboos for sweeping soot, he followed it with 7 and 7. 今日は竹売り、明日宝船。今日は竹売り、明日宝船。Today a bamboo vendor, tomorrow a treasure ship. Now, hearing this, Kikaku is put off by Gengo's none too poetic, pecuniary thoughts and stomps off. But when he learns about the vendetta and its success the following day, he realizes what Gengo had meant, rushes out, catch up with 47 men marching toward temple, Sengakuji, and then exclaims, catching Gengo, here, I'm so sorry, I'm no good at haikai, he cried. Now, some of you may wonder, what does this have to do with haiku? What is haikai? Of course, most of you know a great deal about haiku and haikai and history of the poetic form of haiku. To give, even though I give you a short history, what I call a general, very unusually genealogical evolution of verse forms in Japan. They developed a singularly, this is, I don't know any other country, but this is unusual the way it happened. First came the 57577 tanka, which had become the principal poetic form for the Japanese by the 8th century. That verse form, tanka, despite its brevity, tended to break up into upper and lower hemstitches, 575 and 7 and 7. And that spawned the essential sequential poetic form of renga, linking the long and short verse units. The Princeton professor Earl Miner called them, these units, as stanzas, up to 50 times. So if you do long and short 50 times, you get 100. So, and the opening verse of that sequential poetic form of renga was called hokku. Hokku opening verse. Became more or less independent pretty soon enough. This process of fragmentation alarmed a Victorian student of Sing's Japanese, Basil Hall Chamberlain, who in the meantime called the masses of rules devised for Renga composition plural. He couldn't believe that things like this happened to a verse form or forms. Chamberlain made those observations around 1900, just about the time the word hokku began to be replaced by the word haiku. That was also when Europeans began to be attracted to the brief, ephemeral form of haiku and adapted the French poets calling it aikai. They still use it. So that if you remember haikai, aikai, I made sure to listen to the internet and this process aikai. So what is haikai? It means humor, playfulness, and the word began to be applied to the Renga that was different from the orthodox, proper, decorous Renga composed by the imperial court poets. In a broad sense, you can say haikai referred to the composition using daily demotic language or images you see in daily in the daily life. So essentially, I'm gonna skip, but one example was when I came here 50 years ago, 51 years ago, I was invited to a Thanksgiving party. It's very proper family. And at one point I blurted crap, and then everybody was shocked and stopped, conversation stopped. I didn't know the meaning, the other meaning of crap. I simply assumed that crap meant nonsense. So to go back to the original, the original exchange between kikaku and gengo consists of the first and second verse units or stanzas of a haikai no renga, a toshi no o, which I translated probably badly, year's tail or year's end, meaning the end of the year is haikai by the standard of the court decorous, proper court renga. Court renga was more very strict about what kind of language you can use. And takeuri bamboo vendor is a daily occurrence, and it doesn't happen in the court. And takarabune, that's the kind of word that doesn't appear in the court poetry. Court poetry is a word Earl Minor Sensei and Brower published in 1960. That was a big book from Stanford University. That's why I call it court poetry. I don't know whether Japanese think of it as court poetry, but that's very appropriate. Now, having said that, I must tell you that this exchange was a counterfeit, fake. It was made up. there are a number of stories made up for the 47 samurai. But this made-up story between the Kikaku and Otaka Gengo was very popular, and everybody believed it from the beginning of the 19th century to probably the middle of or Japan's defeat in 1945, and then it petered out. There's another counterfeit, a letter Kikaku is reputed to have written about the night when the 47 samurai raid on Kira, the supervisor official's mansion, and killed 16 people and wounded 20 people. So Kikaku reported that he and his Heikai friends were having a Heikai session that night, that particular night, the night of 14th of 12th month, next to Akira's mansion. I will not quote the whole letter, but Kikaku's hokku woven into the letter goes the next one. Wagamono to omoeba karushi, kasa no yuki. That's 575. Wagamono to omoeba karushi, kasa no yuki. Kasa no yuki. I think it's your snow and it's light on your hat. This hokku reminds me when my anthology of Japanese poetry with Burton Watson. Burton Watson died 2 years ago at age 91. From the country with 8 islands, the anthology came out in 1981. The New York Times Book Review honored us by giving its review the front page status. Unhappily, the reviewer they chose was Anthony Thwaite, who had worked on the Penguin Book of Japanese verse with Jeffrey Bonus back in 1964. The English poet couldn't have been could not have been generous. He was generally snarky. One of the few of my, he said, one of my few one-liners that might have worked, was with, he said, with the stroke of skill or luck. So that is, this one incidentally became a kind of a proverb when it's, when I think it's your snow and it's light on your hat. Osaka Gengo was the best haiku writer among those of the 47 samurai who studied haikai or hokku. He even wrote a travelogue sprinkled with hokku, like a famous one by Basho, which is Oku no Hosomichi, a narrow road to the interior. Like a dozen of the 47 samurai, he left a jisei before he died. Jisei is a farewell to the world. Thus, he wrote it on a tanzaku adorned with speckles of gold, a very Japanese touch, and included it in his last letter to his mother. It's a mother complex or something. He wrote 2 long letters to his mother. he did so just before 7 days before they carried out the vendetta. That means 7th of 12th month of 1702. So the next one, 山を咲く力も折れて松の雪。山を咲く力も折れて松の雪。In my terrible translation, it goes, rending the mountain, my strength broken snow on the pine. Now, rending may not work, maybe tearing the mountain. Among the Jisei, farewell to the world, verses left by maybe about 20 of them. This is regarded as the best. Now, to change the subject, when you talk about haiku, you talk about Zen, the greatest Zen proselytizer in this country, perhaps the whole world, Suzuki Teitaro, otherwise known as a daisetsu. Daisetsu means big clumsiness. Suzuki asserted that a haiku does not express ideas, but puts forward images reflecting intuitions. That is, images not tampered by the poetic mind. Images that are tuitions themselves. On the other hand, the greatest proselytizer of haiku in the English language, B.H. Blythe, followed suit and simply said, haiku is a form of Zen. Long these observations in the mid 20th century, Natsume Soseki, who many of you must know, the author of I'm a Cat and Kokoro, for example, he had written, quote, haiku has a Zen flavor. Western poetry has a Christian flavor. Therefore, haiku is of plain taste. It's playful. At times, it is unworldly. Western poetry is dense. It never leaves human sentiments, no matter how far it may go. This is what he said. Many of you have read Kokoro in Yale professor Edwin McClellan's translation. He called this Kokoro is untranslatable, so his translation is simply called Kokoro. I mention this because I studied back in 55 years ago, Joseph Conrad for my master's degree. So I'm tempted. I have to say that Kokoro's very complicated epistolary format, Natsume Soseki learned from Joseph Conrad's Lord Gem. When you read again, you realize it. Natsume Soseki, who studied Zen at the Engaku-ji, Rinzai Zen in Kamakura for a while. The experience he described 15 years after that in his novel called, is this okay? Maybe it's okay? Sorry. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, as I was saying, Sasaki, who studied Zen at the Engakuji in Kamakura for a while, he wrote about it in his novel called Mon. Mon means gate. He was sent to England by the government in 1900, and there engaged in, quote, frantic efforts to discover the nature of literature and of cultural differences, end of quote. This is what Harvard professor Howard Hibbett put it in an article called Soseki and the Psychological Novel. Psychological novel is Shindi Shosetsu. It was in England that he suffered from one of his severe bouts of neuralgia, which is no longer used nowadays. I checked it. It's a shinkei suijaku, severe case of nervous breakdown. Soseki, anyway, was a haiku writer of some distinction before his fame as a novelist eclipsed it. Some of his haiku that I like are the early ones from the group of a dozen when Toyo, his older brother's wife, with whom he was in love, died on July 28, 1891. So the next three are from the group of about 12 haiku he wrote. So the first one is Asagaoya Saita Bakari no Inochi Kana. Asagaoya Saita Bakari no Inochi Kana. Morning glory, it's life that had just bloomed. The next one is 人生を25年に縮めたり。人生を25年に縮めたり。She shrunk her life to 25 years. Actually, she is likely to have died at age 24. In those days, they used to add automatically 1 year. The next one is 今日よりは誰に見た天秋の月. Amazingly enough, I remember learning about this, the last one, in high school. So, frivolous high school boy dreams about young woman who spurned you, and so on. Well, my translation, there's a mistake here. So from today on, to whom shall I compare this autumn moon? What was praised by Masaoka Shiki, who's exact of his age and became a very famous haiku reformer. He didn't like these squishy haiku, but praised other things. I don't know if any of these sweet lamentations has anything to do with Zen. When he talks about Zen flavor or Zen mi, like when you say, nowadays the word umami has become part of English language. Umami means aji, flavor, taste. When he talked about Zen flavor, Sasaki had meant a suggestion of the ability to transcend life and death. The proposition of Daisetsu Suzuki's famous book, Zen and Japanese Culture. Except that, of course, he, all his life, couldn't transcend life and death. When you speak of haiku and Zen in America, you also think of Gary Snyder, Jack Kerouac, and Allen Ginsberg, and many others. Many Americans have become Zen masters, Roshi. These people didn't become a Roshi. Now, Snyder came to Zen through Daisetsu Suzuki and Kerouac through Snyder. Snyder appears to have not written many haiku, though you might not be able to pick up any number of his poems. I'm talking about when you read his poems and pick one and say, this must be a haiku. On the other hand, Kerouac, who had studied Buddhism on his own, is said to have pursued Zen through haiku as passionately as he pursued liquor, as he was devoted to his mother. There's a lot of people who suffer from mother complex. He defined, this is a quote, American non-Japanese haikus. Now, he used the word haikus, plural, S, rather than, today it's not fashionable. You don't say haikus. In any case, he defined American non-Japanese haiku as short 3-line poems or poems. Now, poem, P-O-M-E-S, that's he applied. And then he also called the haiku pops. So short 3-line poems or poems rhyming or non-rhyming, delineating little samandhis. Now, samadhi, as you may know, the ultimate state of meditation, which you are supposed to attain when you are close to become a Buddha. So delineating little samadhis, if possible, usually of Buddhist connotation, aiming towards enlightenment. That's a quote. Now, Regina or Regina, I used to know her, but she disappeared. Regina Weinreich collected 700 of Kerouac's haiku in Book of Haikus. You can pick any of them as here's a Kerouac's haiku out of 700. So here we go. I picked randomly. Reading the sutra, I decided to go straight. No, he's famous for being gay, so was he saying this? I don't know. Next one drop from the blue spruce, 2 more drops. The next one is a very famous one, missing a kick at the icebox door, it closed anyway. Next one, desolation, desolation, so hard to come down off of. Now it sounds like a Buddhist something, but it also, desolation here refers to the desolation peak in the North Cascades. It's very close to Canada, where Kerouac worked as a fire lookout one summer, near where Snyder had worked for several years before, as I learned from Dana Goodyear's article in the New Yorker when I was writing this, called Zen Master. It's about Snyder. You can easily find it on the internet. That was written in October 20, 2008. It's called Zen Master. As to Allen Ginsberg, he wrote clusters of one-liners, each one consisting of 17 syllables. I casually just picked only 2 of them. I felt a breeze below my waist and realized that my fly was open. Aha. And then sitting forward, elbows on knees, oh, what luck to be able to clap. These are the, last 2 years or so, he wrote a kind of a diary haiku. He died in 1997. So he dates each one of these things. Ginsberg called these American sentences, although his secretary, Bob Rosenthal, called them American haiku, 17 syllables with the common haiku associational enjambment of senses, but carried through on a single strophe, S-T-R-O-F-P-H-E, each, carried through on a single strophe each. This appears in Death and Haiku, Death and Fame, last poems of Ginsberg, posthumously compiled and published. If you can call a haiku that way, that's a great idea. I used to know Bob Rosenthal back in 1985 when Bob and 5 others, American poets, got together to invite Japanese poets to this country. But we lost touch. Of course, my monolinear translations of haiku seldom reach 17 syllables, let alone achieve poetic elegance. Most of my translations are downright inelegant. Gary Hawthorne, a well-known and American haiku poet, did wonder about my translations. While reading my book, On Haiku, he kindly wrote, quote, "I don't want to be mean to you, but it appears to me that the English versions of a haiku in your book could have been used some help with their flow. Help in turning them into a haiku so that English speakers could appreciate in a deeper way the import of the moment. End of quote. I asked her, can I quote you? So I said, sure. So I'm not sneak attack. Mr. Hassan cited two examples to demonstrate what he means with his own rewrites. The first one is from the section on Kobayashi Issa, where I select his haiku that show what you might call exaggerated perspective that Hokusai made very famous in his 36 views of Mount Fuji, Fugoku 36K. In particular, his painting of a giant wave toppling over 3 wooden skiffs in the foreground and a magnificent but tiny Mount Fuji far in the distance. So I want to, in this selection about haiku by Kobayashi Issa, I chose the one that shows this exaggerated small things in the forward, and Mount Fuji or anything else very far away. So this the first one is a tombo ya hatta to niramu Fuji no yama. A dragonfly gives a theatrical glare at Mount Fuji. So Gary Hassan didn't think it works, so he gave his version. Towards Mount Fuji, a dragonfly's theatrical glare. The other example Gary cites is from Masaoka Shiki, the haiku reformist who radically shifted the direction of hokku to modern haiku, or it is said. Japan in the second half of the 19th century suddenly found itself hemmed in by competing imperialist powers. Shiki had nightmares about some country invading Japan. But as soon as Japan started war with China over the Korean peninsula, he was seized by the desire to go to the front to witness battles and describe them in haiku, as he wanted to do so as a war correspondent. His wish was fulfilled after a while, but by the time he went to China, Jinchen, it's in kanji, it's a gold castle that's in northeast China. By the time he reached there in early 1895, all the major battles were over, and actually the ceasefire was in work at the time. The haiku he managed to write were later dismissed by at least one prominent haiku writer, Kato Shuson, as the worst examples of Edo-style trivial, versifying, trivial versifying, Furyu Inji, that Shiki was determined to grow out of. he wanted to make haiku into the modern haiku. So one of them goes, this is what Kato Shuson despised as, this is no different from our old-styled Edo hokku. 戦いの後に少なきツバメかな After a battle, there are only a few sorrows. So he, Gary Hassan, found this very unsatisfactory. So he came up with his own translations. So the next one, only a few sorrows, a battle over. Or alternatively, he said, after the battle, a few sorrows left. I'm sure that you all agree that Gary Hassan's rewrites read like haiku, appear more haiku-esque in English. I translate Japanese haiku in one line, whether they're written in the set form or teikei or 575 or not, as long as they're so presented in print. When you ask them to write on a piece of paper, they will not do it most of the time. They 3 lines and 5 lines and so on. A look at the Japanese haiku magazines and haiku books will tell you that practically all of them are printed in one line. And this printing convention is what I'm following in my translation. There are some Japanese haiku writers who don't follow one-line form, but they are very rare. Even though they are rare, their existence presents me with a question: what to do with these non-one-line haiku? Now, I'm not the first person to translate haiku in one line. The famous Lafcadio Han did at least one, the famous pond frog leap. That last time, Mizuno, the sound of water, Ginsberg translated that as kerplunk. Actually, he wrote a whole poem and set it to music, the frog pond kerplunk. So there was a Lafcadio Han that toward the end of the 19th century, but later there was another one, and that's a fascinating person from New Zealand named Max Bickerton, who went to Japan in 1920s, sympathized with some proletarian movement writers, and translated some of them, and as a result was thrown into jail and suffered the 3rd degree. I guess most of you know, but when I encounter the word 3rd degree, I have to ask my wife, and she knew, of course, and her brother, who died a couple of years ago, he was a policeman, so she knew. すみませんね。Thank you. So here's one of his translations, Bickerman. Fortunately, of course, New Zealand at the time was part of the British Empire. So the embassy, British embassy, could talk to the police. What the hell are you doing? He's part of a British Empire, so he was let out. Bickerton didn't have to suffer terrible injury and left this, Japan to elsewhere. So here's one of his translations of Issa, Kobayashi Issa's Hokku, done in the early 1930s. It appears in his translation writing called Issa's Life and Poetry. Now this is one of the most famous ones every Japanese is supposed to know. 我と来て遊べや親のないスズメ and in Bickerton translation, oh, won't some orphan sparrow come and play with me? As it happens that, of course, Issa must have been a liar too. Liar. Trump calls everybody, you liar. Because after this, I wrote this when I was 5 years old. Like Max Bickerton, I do not recreate the syllabic count of the original in my translation. The doyen of Japanese literature, Donald Keene, for example, he translates haiku in 5753 lines. The situation is almost the exact opposite in English, and I think in most European languages, Russian, Persian. I mention this because my Facebook friend in Iran has asked me if she could translate my translations into Persian. And she did. Of course, she did so. My translation, one of the translations were recast in 3 lines. That's all right. Have you seen haiku in Persian? It's so pretty. You know, much better, looks better than mine. In English and other languages, most haiku are presented in 3-line poems, as Kerouac did, as Gary Hawthorne did in his rewrites of my translation. That, of course, reflects the assumption that the set form, Teikei of 575, actually consists of 3 lines. There are also other differences between Japanese and English and other languages, or especially American haiku. Most notably, American haiku writers are far more willing than Japanese haiku written by writers to try new forms. These American haiku are more innovative than Japanese. Japanese do not try to do, as far as the form goes. Marlene Martin, for one, wrote a number of concrete haiku, sometimes called visual haiku, and sometimes called calligram in haiku. The calligram, the French poet Apollinaire wrote those when you write about rain, for example. It's so first one, of course, you can guess what it is, right? It's upside down, but it's a peacock. On the other one, rain drop. Is this haiku? Don't ask me, okay? With these, I gave the date. She died last year. I didn't know this until I was writing this, and I checked. So Mary Mountain died last year. Excuse. With these things, now of course, if you check Mari Mountain on the internet, the first thing you see will shock you, so I will not quote it today. No, it's not shock, it's just interesting. With these, she was being very helpful, playful. But for the last 30 years ago, 30 years or so, she has been deadly serious. And she wrote one-line haiku, one after another, all, as far as I know, focused on the nature degradation of nature, environmental degradation. In case you wonder about her surname, Mountain, she was married to John Willis, who is regarded as one of the greatest nature haiku writer. So I quote one. This is a very good one when you think about it. Boulders just beneath the boat. It's dawn. You can find them, many of his things, haiku, in any of these, any of the anthology, haiku anthology. Cole Vandenhul published three, all of them the same title, haiku anthology. And many of them are found, John Willis haiku are found in them. I don't know whether John Willis published a book of these things in one volume. He must have. There are, of course, American writers who have written 575 syllable, 3-line haiku. The most illustrious of them all may be Ordway, usually shortened to O. Ordway, Mabson, Southard. The next one, the Mabson, I asked the internet, and it can be Mabson. It means the autumn equinox, or so the internet tells me. So there are three, and in his case, his daughter, Barbara, with Randy Brooks. Randy Brooks is he's an editor, he's a publisher and haiku writer, pretty well known. So faint, rolling thunder. Out from the hills come dust whirls and big drops of rain. At their shore cliff tryst, the lad's tongue fishes out hers and gets gentle bites. He said there are three things important to him: womanhood, nature, and haiku, maybe. He died, as you see, 2000. Looking at Southard's 5750 3-line haiku, some Japanese trying to cast them into Japanese. Now, some of you are Japanese, I can tell. So if you look at them and how can you translate that into Japanese? Well, when you think about it, you realize these things say too much. At least as far as the Japanese 5-7 can say goes. So if those Japanese think about this, it is correct. The average Japanese haiku do not contain that much information. That's one reason haiku writers in this country mostly do not follow the example of O. Mason Salter's strict adherence to the standard Japanese haiku form of 575. Reading many translations of Japanese haiku, American haiku realized that haiku do not say that much. If you say that much, haiku loses. If you say so much things like across the next one too, if you say that much, then it loses the essence of haiku, or so many haiku writers in America come to believe. Having said that, I must confess that in translating English haiku, American haiku into Japanese, I go against my own principle that I follow in translating Japanese haiku into English. I cast them all into 575 syllables. That's because if I didn't do it, Japanese readers would think I'm utterly incompetent. So the last part of this talk is, across the still lake, this is my favorite, I quote it quite often, across the hill, a still lake, through up curls of morning mist, the cry of a loon. In my translation, it goes, Mizumi no asa kiri mau ya abi no koe. Now, some of you Japanese, wow, no, this can't be good. How about asa giri agaru? Now, of course, if you, most of you have experience of living right next to a lake or a pond, in the morning, the steam rises. So that's. The next one is, as I mentioned already, Ko van der Heuvel. He's the greatest anthology ever so far. He's now, he was born in 1931, so he's about 11 years older than I am. I'm about to expire, but he, 2 or 3 years ago, he went to a retirement home in a very pretty place called Glen Cove, up somewhere. We visited that twice, and so he, Ko van der Heuvel said the next one, the one-liner, he engraved it on his grave in Maine, already prepared. So it's a good one. A stick goes over the falls at sunset. It says far less than across the hills, still lake, through up curls of morning mist, the cry of a loon. But I translated that into 575. 棒切れや日暮れの滝を越え落ちる。 The last one is my Russian friend. It's right there. Natalia Rudchev. She's an amazing person. She's a philosopher, dancer, and she sends photographs, astonishing photographs. And she's a haiku poet, tanka poet. Now the next one I quote is she won with this haiku, Kumamoto City International Haiku Contest. They started doing this, the Kumamoto City. Why does Matsuyama is famous because Shiki lived there. And Shiki, but Kumamoto decided to do it because Natsume Soseki lived there for 4 years or so, toward the end of the 19th century. And so Natalia Rudchev's Tears of Joy, raindrops run up the window of home-bound plane. I translated, Kino mado ni shiri agaru ame, kiro namida. Now finally, last paragraph of my terrible talk. Allow me to advertise my book, On Hook, a little bit, on haiku. Because Japan's role in the Asian Pacific War continues to weigh on the Japanese psyche, I have included a chapter on how haiku writers, Japanese haiku writers, reacted to the war. And also I included a chapter on a haiku writer who took part in the Nanjing massacre. Also, because of all the talk about comfort women in recent years, I devote a chapter to a pampan, a prostitute, a hooker, who catered to occupation personnel. They are called pampan. The origin of the word pampan, there are lots of theories. Some say it comes from pom-pom girls. But in any case, they are called. And this person, Shizuko Suzuki, fell in love with a black soldier who was soon mortally wounded in the Korean War, shipped back to this country meaning America, and died, it is believed. Shizuko also believed to have committed suicide shortly afterward. Thank you very much.
So my first question, Hiro, is why do you think haiku, what is it about haiku that makes it so appealing and so popular outside of Japan?
Well, of course, the simple question is too short, so short. How about asking Jeff, why do you think it's so popular? She teaches at UNIS, United Nations International School.
Hiro, you have such a talent for deflection. I always admire it.
Pretty sneaky, Hiro.
I'm not a foreigner, so how do I know why haiku are so popular?
I think he's ducking the question. Okay, well, let me try another one. Having read the introduction to your new book, which is on sale in the lobby, I I really loved the part where you talked about having arrived in the U.S. in 1968, was it?
Yes, sir.
And very rapidly you got pressed into service as a teacher of haiku. And you said that you didn't really know much about it, much more than any ordinary educated Japanese person might know. But you then embraced haiku and poetry. So I wondered if that's an avocation that appealed to you in those days mostly professionally, or was it personally, or maybe both?
Well, I don't remember what I wrote, but I was asked to give by the Japan Society, Haiku Society of America. That was established by coincidence in 1968 at Columbia by Henderson. Henderson, who was a professor there. In 1977, I was asked by the Haiku Society of America, Bill Higginson. At the time, he was a president of the Haiku Society of America, and he asked me to talk about haiku from the viewpoint of a translator of modern Japanese poetry. So I said the denigrating thing about haiku. Haiku doesn't, because I was English major, and of course the English major, you learn about Keats and all that sort of Keats, Shakespeare, sonnets. None of them. Some of them, of course, poets. My favorite poet was also a favorite of my teachers, Lindley Williams Hubbell, who was a 1927 Yale younger poet. He liked, particularly, among other things, Robert Herrick. Now, Robert Herrick, if you read the whole thing, you find very, very short poems. Now, that has nothing to do with it, but generally speaking, English American poems are much longer than haiku. So that's why haiku doesn't make any sense. That's generally what I said. And then next year, Haiku Society of America elected me
As president.
Yeah, but they still do it. No, here's Rita. Even though it's a small organization, they set up a selection committee and several people, and then circulated, and then who got them, and so on. So at the time, Al Marx was translated Mishima Yukio and other people. He was the committee chairman, and he told me, "You are selected." Really? So that's why.
Do you have any advice for Western readers of haiku for the best way to appreciate them? Maybe especially for novice readers?
That's Jeff's.
Now, that's the second time you've tried that on me. I don't know if I can accept that, Hiro. Please, give it up.
Torture. What is your question?
Advice for novice readers.
We're talking about American people who want to learn about haiku. Read books like anthologies of Koban and Huro. No, that's not good. That's too like one-line translation, no good. That not many people follow. Nowadays there are a number of people, but But Marine, mountain did until last year. But they're still a minority, and if you read that, you got a wrong idea. So don't recommend it.
Well, how about this one, Hiro? Because I brought along my personal copy of your 100 Frogs book, which I've always loved. And this might be an example of a way to enter an appreciation for haiku.
Well, it's good because it contains a lot of American poets and English writers.
Yeah.
Most of at the time, American poets, haiku poets writing one line was a very minority. Today, maybe 20% try. But at the time, so I didn't include many one line, except Marine Mountains.
Now, I have one last question. And you mentioned in your talk a couple of times the word internet. And I wonder if the internet how the internet may have impacted people's appreciation of haiku or people's production of haiku.
I don't read haiku on the internet. That's difficult. Of course, if you check, the great number of haiku on the internet. So if you read them, you can learn them. One of the sites, maybe it doesn't exist anymore, but it used to be called a spam haiku. The last time I read them, probably 15 years ago, was by all those money makers on the Wall Street Journal. They get very bored making money, so they exchange 575, haiku, and they are called spam haiku. They are bad mouthing their employers and so on.
Oh, that's interesting.
But other than that, there are a great many haiku available on the internet, no?
Well, thank you, Hiro, so much. I think it's time to go have a book signing, and
Thank you.
let's enjoy that. Thank you again.